My name is Seth Roby. We're here at the Myrna Loy to view my recent exhibition. They're all woodcuts that I hand printed and hand carved about my experience and time in the Peace Corps. I served in Ghana, West Africa from 2012 to 2014. So during that 2-year time, I was able to assimilate into the culture, get to know a lot of the individuals there that I worked with. And from there, using kind of my artistic training as a printmaker, I continued to print and create these drawings that I came back to the States with to then turn into woodcuts. I've been working on this show for well over those 2 years. Now it's 2016, and I'm pretty excited to finally have things up on the wall. But that's where I've been doing, hiding away in my hole. So that's where we're at. As you can see, a lot of these pieces here, they're all, of course, about the places that I visited, the places that, in ways I lived. But what they're more about is kind of a sense of understanding as I was getting to know the culture, and the culture was getting to know me. Things that looked so different at the time, all of a sudden began to make sense over time. And so I really mimicked that sort of moment where things started to translate when I created these images, because these images are all about space. And there's every inch of them is just packed with activity, which, if any of you have traveled to like a third world country, know and understand that, there's just bodies on top of bodies in ways, and there's a huge sense of community, so everybody is definitely trying to occupy what they can and work with one another. So that's definitely what I went and started with, and then I began to really play. Play is a huge theme in all of my work. And all of these pieces are in ways like a visual experiment for me as I begin to play with, in this way, the shapes, the positive and negative space, and then also with trying to enjoy the time that I have there. You definitely get nostalgic when you're out of the country for that long and away contact from everybody for that long. So anyway, this entire body of work definitely sort of resonates with more of a psychological feeling or state that I had at the time. Some pieces in particular that we're looking at, this piece up here called Coast is a village that a friend of ours lived in that we got to travel to on the southern coast there in Ghana. And a lot of people that have seen this work that I've shown them before, I love that experience when they're looking at it, and then they finally say, "Oh, okay, that's what that is," and "Oh, that's what that boat is," and that's kind of what I felt at the time when I was in the country. I was looking at these things, and having these experiences that seemingly didn't really make sense at the time, but all of a sudden it became a part of everyday life, and I found myself beginning to truly understand more what it was like in ways to be an American outside of the country, but then it also how I best could do my service there in the Peace Corps. So from there, I used the prints then as sort of the catalyst in creating the spaces and shapes that you would then see hanging on the ceiling within what I call light gels. Same sort of principle where I'm playing around with the space. But the idea was like these images in the jungle canopy. So I really was going for, a really strong presence of light, and you can't help but to have light in high contrast work. When you're a printmaker, when you have that black and that white, you got to know the sort of radiant light quality that comes from it. And so from there, my mind began to continue sketching, and the sculpture itself is about that. And I wanted to create something that had a lot of visual play, a lot of visual depth, and I wanted something that the spaces just finally opened up and had a sense of freedom. So I created a sculpture out of a single sheet of plywood that unfolded more like a spring would, and just kind of like as you begin to uncoil out there, and then that sort of experience, you finally, once again, get to understand, but you're truly uncoiling your feelings, your thought, and the whole process. So that's primarily what I have going on here in these works that I'm displaying here at the Myrna. So being out of the country for 27 months and being able to be enriched with this experience, it's definitely a part of not only Peace Corps' goal where you come back and you share those stories, but I think it's very important that we always do tell our stories with one another. I think storytelling is what not only gives us a better understanding of one another, but also better understanding of the world. And what better way to, say you're doing your part than trying to spread that sort of understanding. So I hope that each viewer, when they come in here, can at least look at these pieces as a storyline, as a timeline of an experience. And they may find certain elements from their own travels, certain poses or certain objects or certain ways of living that they can relate to. But mostly what I want them to get out of it is that things are not as different as they seem. No matter where you travel, no matter where you go, we all have similar experiences. We all actually live in a very similar way. We can, of course, break that down and deconstruct it into, but they don't have running water, or they don't have this. But we all have the very true essence when we live, and that's the people that we're around and how we have to go about our everyday lives. And I hope there's kind of a sense of joy that a viewer can gain from just looking at these, looking at the work, being able to identify with certain areas, maybe not identifying at others, but maybe then being able to ask me and I get to then share that experience again, and just continue the dialogue. So that's what I hope most viewers can really gain from the works. Probably my favorite piece is the bus ride. And with the bus ride, as you look into it, you can find yourself a part of the masses there. And I was actually always first drawn to large groups of people and like what happens with the individual versus the collective, and how do you maintain being an individual, yet you have to work together. And so this bus ride was kind of one of that first pieces, and you'll probably see a lot of groupings or festivals and those sort of pieces in my show. But this one in particular was something that I had to observe every day. And it was so shocking at first. And so when I drew this, I thought like, wow, I don't know if I'll ever be able to understand this. And then when I went back to my sketches later, I said, well, how in the world would anybody even, understand this sort of piece? And so it made me really want to do it even more. And I think overall compositionally and stuff, that one turned out sort of the best to summarize that sort of individual versus collective feeling. There's actually some very unique ones in here that I did while I was in Ghana, and you'll notice those because I wouldn't say the quality is more poor, but you'll notice some that are a little bit more rough in the printing quality. So I have one there, and I have two here, both north and south, and then the large piece in the corner. All of those were carved in Ghana, and they were also carved from discarded school desks. At the school that I taught at there was a huge pile of desks. I mean, it was just, when you were, as a student there, you're required to come with your chair and your desk. That was a part of your admission fees. And so you would be lugging these things there. And inevitably, you set up in the classroom, and people throughout the day still are using that classroom, and then they break down. And they break down quick over the use of a semester. And instead of repairing them, they piled them up, which was kind of odd. I think people really wouldn't understand that so much, the idea of just discarding. And they're all beautiful hardwoods there. And so I was able to just sift through all these tabletops and all these desktops, and just having a razor blade with me, I was able to carve the first 4 that really kind of kept me going. And from there, a lot of the students started to wonder what it was I was doing. And at first I was doing it just because it was what I've always done. I've always carved, I've always cut these images. But I realized more and more how much of like printmaking was a part of me. And they had never, out there in Zabzugu was the name of my village. And Zabzugu, they'd never seen printing. So what I did is I was able to make a roller and then also make ink out of some leftover oil, linseed oil, and then with just the charcoal from the coal pots from cooking. So we made black ink, and then I taught the kids how to print. And that was one of those really unique experiences where then all of a sudden these kids started printing their own stuff. And unfortunately too, they did cover the walls with all their ink fingerprints. They were a mess, and he didn't have like mineral spirits or anything like that to really clean it off, and so it was definitely a mess. But what the heck, you know, it was a good learning experience. And a few days later, it all came off. So anyway, but that's kind of one of the stories, my stories behind the stories that I'm presenting. I mean, everything comes from nature. It comes from pure observation. I usually draw directly onto the plate and onto the surface. This was probably a rare time where I drew from sketches. And the only reason why is when you first start to make your initial marks and your initial memories, they're actually in their purest form when you can just get them laid out. And so it was good to have that as a reference. But like for example, the piece called Atuabo here, which is another piece on the coast. That piece particularly, I did have to work a little bit from memory. And so I did have the sketches, but then seeing and remembering what everybody was doing at that time and then trying to conglomerate that together into a composition. And it allowed me for a lot of reflection time. Coming back from an experience like that, it was really good to be able to work, to be able to relive my experiences. And it's kind of a sad, happy sort of moment. But then I've got to preserve them at the same time. So I was really happy about that. But definitely all of this stuff comes from nature. The night bus, of all the Peace Corps experiences I can remember is driving, in the mornings on this bus, and the goats sleep on the road. They're just everywhere on the road. They don't sleep on the dirt. They're loaded in the road. So when the headlights of the bus hits that herd of goats, I mean, and they're just all looking at you, and they're just as tired as you are. It's 3, 4 in the morning. And so, a lot of these prints come from those experiences. And I send these a lot to my Peace Corps friends who, immediately we all remember that, and they can kind of transport us back to that experience. The one piece, I could talk a little bit about this piece called Compound. This is actually where we lived, my wife and I. And it is meant to be more of like a map of the environment. The lower half has the inside of the compound. We shared a compound with 15 other people and kind of the community that happened there. It contains images of people cooking on the coal pots, taking mangoes out of a tree, one girl fetching water. We even have our pet monkey Loyal swinging from the tree. He totally domesticated animal, caught when he was a little infant, and just loved hanging out inside. And they did have a small rope attached to him, but he used that as a swing. And as games, we would lengthen the rope, and so when some of the students from the school would come in to play with the monkey, the rope would be longer than that they remember, and the monkey would try to catch them. And that was just a huge game, and every kid came over to get caught by the monkey. But all of those sort of memories and experiences, I try to really put into the piece. Granted, I'm the only one who's going to really know that. So I definitely try to demarcate the space to make it clear of what these objects are, what is it that somebody's doing, try to make appropriate gestures, so that way somebody can actually share my story visually if I'm not there. And then the top half of the piece is the outside of the compound, where the borehole was, where everybody in the village came to fetch water. A woman selling what's called bow fruit, which is a fried bread. And the students would come, and that was their lunch. There's a school bus. Even though it never worked, I never saw it move. In 27 months, it just sat there. Cows. And you'll see a lot of similar motifs in my work with, I really enjoy cows. They were all over the landscape. They were not really that edible. They ate whatever they could, and we were in sub-Saharan conditions, so they were very thin, and they were definitely kind of more as a symbol of status. But you'll definitely see cows and goats and chickens throughout the work, and then of course a lot of children. Even the title of the sculpture is called "Children at Play." And even though really it seemed like they were always working, there was a huge sense of play about their daily chores, and you'll see that sense of the working individual. So work and play, those animals, you'll definitely see those motifs repeated again and again. This piece is about the marketplace, And it's entitled Every 6 Days because every 6 days the markets would come over from Togo, since we live near the border. And that was the day where you could buy more than just onions and tomatoes. And so we looked forward to this every 6th day, and it's similar to like the farmers markets that you would find in your community, but imagine being the farmers market for an entire region. So, you know, it'd basically be people coming from like Avon and Townsend and East Helena and Clancy, anything probably within 20 miles easily. Every little village would come to near us where we were, and we'd walk 45 minutes to this market, and every 6 days everything was laid out. And it's quite the day to catch up with relatives, to find the most beautiful local cloth. A lot of women were there to see what the new styles were, and that's where you begin to see the similarity. There was really no difference than our everyday mall, minus the fact that this mall, you knew everybody, and this was definitely a place to coming together, but they exchanged wares, the trading happened. You could buy meat that day. You could, if your kettle spoiled or developed a hole in it, you could finally replace it. You know, it was really kind of a wonderful time. Plus, if you needed to travel, it was the one time a vehicle could be on the road. So you could catch a vehicle that day instead of having to walk or try to beg a ride. But once again, just like in the compound piece, this one is divided almost in half, with the top and bottom parts talking about the same location, but definitely shown at different perspectives. I am very sensitive to space. You can use that metaphorically or literally, but with that, I really enjoy changing up the perspective. I love taking objects that should be seemingly smaller because they're farther away and making them bigger so they're more pronounced. That way, every part of the composition kind of is treated equally, and that way there's no one emphasis. That way your eyes have to keep moving. So I'm very much about kind of removing the focal point and letting the viewer just kind of stare and wander. Just kind of like if you were laying down and watching the clouds and you could see images forming. It's kind of the same experience with looking at these sort of pieces. When you look at them, every space means something. And in that space, there is an action. And I'm hoping you have a reaction to that action. Yeah, I'm really, really happy that the Myrna, I was one of the recipients of the grant, the Artist's Grant this year, and it allowed me to finish this show and to kind of bring it out and bring it to life. And it's really amazing to finally see it not just stuffed away in one of the closets and having it framed and ready to go. So I'm really, really excited about the opportunity here.